We're good to go, Amy, when you're ready.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this semester's Faculty Professional Development Series session. Today, we're going to be featuring a panel discussion of focusing specifically on student skills in first-year classes. My name is Amy, and I'll be getting us started by introducing today's panel. To begin, Becca Pad, the director of the CCS Library, will be subbing in for Ashley Watson today as our moderator. Ashley is a little bit under the weather on this Monday. So thank you, Becca, for stepping in. And our first panelist is Annie Loechle. She is the Director of First Year Advising and Academic Support in the Academic and Registration Office, and also a liberal arts adjunct faculty member, in addition to leading the college's first year experience program. She has a PhD in art history and American studies from Indiana University, and an MA in art history from Tufts, and a BA in art history and studio art from Hanover College. Allie Runyan is our second panelist today, a lecturer of art education and certification officer at CCS, in addition to her role as adjunct professor of art education at Madonna. She earned her BFA in fine arts and art education certificate from CCS. We have an alum. Allison also has experience teaching the DVC 100 Intro to Material Culture course. Our third panelist is Laura Kovick. Is the composition lecturer, and section lead in the liberal arts department. She received an MA in literature and MA certificate in the teaching of writing from Eastern Michigan University, a certificate in secondary education from U of M, and a BA in clothing and textile science from Central Michigan. Laura has also been involved in redesigning CCS's DN 101 and 102 composition courses. And then finally, we have Michelle Lannoo. Michelle is a visiting artist and associate professor in the foundations department and has served as adjunct faculty in the communication design department prior to the role. She earned her BFA in graphic communication from CCS and received a teaching artist certificate from Community Arts Partnership. Michelle has experience teaching DFN 119, which is the digital techniques course, and was also involved in the redesign of its curriculum. And I do also want to mention for the last year, Ashley, Laura, and Michelle, led by Annie, have been a part of a working group focusing on first year curriculum alignment, which I think we'll learn more about as the discussion unfolds.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to hear from all of our panelists today. So our panelists, as Amy was saying, are individuals who teach required freshman courses for students from every major and place great focus on the student cognitive, interpersonal self-leadership, acclimation, and digital skill development, ensuring the students' continued success at CCS. So we're really talking about how we are building these skills during the first year that can be scaffolded during the student's time. So we know that these skills specifically will be necessary to navigate future employment and societal realities, given research gathered from McKinsey, the World Economic Forum, LinkedIn, Global Education Futures, and the the Institute for the Future, just to name a few. As Amy was saying, there was a work group last year and some of our panelists participated. And this work group comprised individuals from different areas that work with the freshman experience. And before we jump into our questions, I'm going to just briefly share my screen. And I want to show the infographic that they made mapping first year skill development. Amy is going to also put this in the chat if you, as a PDF, if you're interested in looking at this as our panelists are talking about the different areas that they have taught within. And this infographic was made by Laura Kavanaugh. So thank you, Laura, for this great map of the different courses. You can also see there's the library in addition to some of the required first year classes. And you can see across these categories, which we're going to be talking about, where different skills are being built. Okay, so our hope for this presentation is that it will begin an institutional dialogue related to how each faculty and staff member can focus on skill development in their interactions with students. And I think these classes are a great place to start. So let's begin asking our panelists our series of questions. And I'm going to just ask a question to our panelists and have them jump in with their thoughts based on their courses, and we'll go from there. We'll also have time for your questions at the end. So our first question is, how do you develop rapport with students to make sure you are creating a learning community within your classroom? Does anyone want to get us started on that?
I'm happy to get us started, and part of my getting started is a shout out to Allie for developing that rapport. So first my answer, and then I'm going to actually put Allie on the spot if that's okay, Allie. So the thing that I definitely do is I actually start every class throughout the semester with an icebreaker, right? It develops less as an icebreaker as the semester goes on and just becomes like a taking the temperature of the room. But I always do an icebreaker, and I also always explain to the students why I do an icebreaker. And to let them know that they're part of a learning community, and this is so that you learn each other's names, but you also learn my name. And it was surprising to me in one of the semesters that I taught that the students actually eventually became so comfortable with me and my FYE leader, who is the student TA for the class. They admitted that they don't know a lot of their instructors' names, right? So I think, including that icebreaker in front of every lesson is really helpful to build that community, build that rapport. But it also allows me to, one of my teaching styles, I guess, is just vulnerability, right? So I tell them in that first class when I explain the importance of icebreakers, that if I were in my classroom, I would be shaking in my boots right now because I hated icebreakers when I was a teenager and early college. Recognizing that they might also be feeling that kind of vulnerability is a way to connect with them and show that I have empathy as well. So that's my piece, but then I want to switch it to Allie here because one of the other things that we do in the FYE program as a whole is have an instructor training. And this year it was very successful because we invited Allie in to talk with us about some of the ways of building that rapport. So Allie, is it okay if I
Yes,
ask you to
thank
take
you.
over?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Annie. I think one of the main things, as any good educator knows, is building relationships with our students. I mean, that's step one. And really, if we think about it, after you get to know your students, that's when learning actually happens. But if you don't have some sort of rapport or communication or something that's at the basis, then a lot of other stuff gets lost in translation. So, like Annie said, doing little like icebreakers, sometimes even calling them icebreakers has like a rough connotation to it. So if you want to call it something else, doing some sort of like entry ticket or game or whatever it is, even having the students like come up with something and say like, hey, next week you two are gonna lead the class in in some sort of like welcome game or something to get students engaged. But I highly recommend doing that throughout the semester, especially in the first semester, so that they are becoming comfortable with you, and then always participate. It's one thing to facilitate, but you as the instructor also have an obligation to lead and like lead by doing, right? So you should also be participating because, you know, if um why would someone do it if you're not going to do it, right? So there's that part. The other key part of this, I think, that goes with like learning community is also knowing that you are learning things too, including learning about them. So putting forth that effort and showing them that you're putting forth an effort into getting to know them. And I know a lot of instructors, like I know I get that way too. You're like, I have so much content to cover. Oh my gosh, how am I going to fit this in one day? Oh my God, we're behind. Oh my God, there's a snow day. What am I doing? But I promise you, carving out these 5 to 10 minutes makes a huge difference. And the students too, they notice it because they know that you care and you put forth this effort. And part of that is also communication. So making sure students know how to get a hold of you, being consistent in communication, and reminding them of those things. Even creating little like support groups at the beginning of class can also be really helpful. Like in the beginning of the semester, dividing the class up into like, okay, here's 2 or 3 people. This is your cohort. If you're gone, if you need notes, if you have questions, these are your people you contact. Just helping them build these skills so that they're not leaving your class confused. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Allie.
Sure.
Laura or Michelle, do you want to jump in at all?
Yeah. Can I jump in? Yeah. So I this kind of piggybacks nicely off what Allie just said. I think it's really important that students know who we are and know us personally. And so I always, whatever kind of icebreaker I'm doing, like Allie said, I will do myself with them at the beginning of class. But I think it's really important, especially in a writing course, students are going to be vulnerable by sharing their writing with each other. And so we have to create safety in the classroom too. And so we talk about that a lot on the very first day, that this is going to be a safe space where we all know each other. And so we have to create a learning community. And so one of the icebreakers we do is that they have to introduce themselves to another person in the class. And then, you know, there's a number of things I want them to share, their program, something they're a fan of, something fun about themselves. And then they introduce that person to the rest of the class. We always sit in a horseshoe on the first few weeks so that they can see each other, because it's not just about me as the instructor, it's about them sharing their ideas back and forth. And so I tell them how important it is that they become friends. They have to know each other in the classroom in order to be vulnerable to share their writing. But we also talk about the difference between a safe space and a brave space, right? We want everyone to feel safe, but when we know each other and we're comfortable with each other, we can feel brave too. And we can be brave in sharing our writing and our ideas and know that no one is judging us on these things, but we're working together in order to make it better. And so we got to establish that right up front. And then once that's established, then it's really easy to continue that throughout the classroom. Everyone feels good about sharing their ideas.
Thank you. I love the idea of a brave space. I think we can all bring that back to our work. Allie, did you want to respond?
Really quickly, to that, when you said something about the classroom horseshoe, another really important thing is changing the dynamic and seating area in the classroom so that it actually encourages talking to each other. This idea of like observer and teacher and leader, like when you're in front of the classroom and you don't move and then everyone's just looking one way, doesn't really allow for engagement with each other. And that's one of the key things that students need, especially early on when they're new and they have to talk to each other. So moving the desks in like a U shape, or moving the desks in a way that's like clumped in like 2 and 2, and they have to face each other and talk to each other. So we're just right away encouraging communication, is already just a small thing you can do right away without students even knowing.
Great, thank you. So, I want to jump into some questions
I
around.
have a,
Oh,
excuse me,
go
could I
ahead, Michelle.
respond?
Yeah,
Sorry.
of course.
We're talking about freshmen, which is why we're so concerned with talking about making them comfortable. And a lot of these strategies are well known and used very effectively in high school and earlier levels of education. So we are the bridge as foundations department and talking about freshmen. Very often they're coming right from high school, so they need these moments of maybe familiar things like this, that we're talking about with these icebreakers. But we have to also, I always think about the fact we have mostly, if I'm not mistaken, adjunct faculty or who are working professionals at the institution. And how do we prepare them also for situations that are not as welcoming, maybe more corporate or more professional? Now, as a freshman, they're not jumping right into those things yet, but I think it's also important that we have to sort of set them up for success in that. I think we have to get their confidence right away. So if it takes the horseshoe and it takes the icebreakers and all those things we know work, those are things have been proven to make students more comfortable. I think it's also been proven when we have their trust and we show vulnerability, that they are more likely to learn. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that how do we prepare them for the situations that are not going to be as welcoming as the bridge? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I think that actually is a great segue into some of our other questions. So, I think that hopefully helps people to have an understanding of some of the ways we are creating community immediately for our students. But I want to talk about some of the skills and the infographic that I shared earlier and that Amy shared in the chat. And so, Michelle, I think that gets to some of what you're talking about is how are we starting to prepare students for their future careers from the first year by building on some of these skills. So I want to start by asking what are some strategies you found most successful to anyone in the group in fostering interpersonal skills in your classroom. So this could include developing communication skills, and I think some of that is kind of starting to be covered and thinking about how you were building rapport, right? So building relationship building between students. Also, how are you helping to foster collaboration as an interpersonal skill or critique? So if any of those are resonating with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'll jump in on that because really peer review of writing is very similar to critiques. And so it's nice to make that clear to students when it comes to the peer review. Maybe they didn't have great peer review of writing experience in high school, but when I compare it to the critiques that they do here at the college, it kind of clicks for them. We also talk a lot about how writing is about making something happen, and the art that they create professionally is also going to be about making something happen. And in order to understand if it is actually working and making happen what you want it to happen, it's got to be a conversation and a collaboration between people. And so we do a lot, our peer reviews are collaborative, they're conversations that people have together. Again, I think a way to foster this is, like we were saying before, the seating is a really easy way to foster it because when we're doing collaborative work, we move into pods, so into tables, so they are facing each other, they're discussing, and just offering them lots of opportunities to have conversations themselves, because that's when they really learn, and they learn from each other. So if it's analyzing moves a writer made in a piece, they're doing that in a group and discussing it. What do you notice? What do you like? What worked? Or if they're doing it over their own writing, they're having those conversations with each other. And we talk about how in the world, in their professional experience, it's going to be collaborative. They're going to have to share their ideas with other people. So we get used to doing that now in class. And I hope that that kind of leads them to understand the professionalism that they'll need eventually too.
Great, thank you. Allie?
Yeah, Laura, I was thinking the same thing in terms of, how we have students communicating with each other. But as you were saying critique, it reminded me last semester when we were, first semester freshmen, there's a lot of them, depending on what school they've been to, they've not ever had a critique, or their idea of a critique is very different than what we maybe do here at the school. So I think also instead of this can be really hard to do, is just assuming that students know these things, is to take a step back and say, okay, this is what I mean by critique, going through the steps, doing an example together, which can feel very tedious. But part of our job as these first year teachers is also setting them up for success for the rest of the time that they're here at CCS. So if we teach them the how and explain the why now, then it becomes easier in their other classes going forward.
Annie?
Yeah, and I mean, just to piggyback on that, right? Like I love that this is something that's going on in multiple classrooms in their first semester. And one of the ways that FYE, I believe, contributes to this notion of critique is we have the privilege of having an FYE leader in the classroom who is also a current student, upper class student. And so what I ask is for, I mean, we do like a how to critique day, and I ask the FYE leader to bring in some of the work they did as a freshman, right? So that students can kind of practice these skills with an upper class student, right? They can see what work they were producing when they were also in their first semester, but also it's kind of low stakes because it's not like they're picking on anybody, or, you know, if they're feeling uncomfortable about saying things that are perhaps a little bit more critical, or, you know, learning those skills of sandwiching, you know, that kind of thing. It's a nice environment for the FYE leader to really kind of lead by example in terms of showing them the advantage of critique.
Great, thank you. Michelle, do you want to share anything on this related to digital fundamentals?
I could just say quickly, because the nature of that course is quite different, online entirely, but some Zoom in person. We have discussion boards, and I have prompts. We have prompts for every week's discussion board, but it's a low stakes kind of way to earn the points, and it's really just regardless of what they say. I find that they end up having a lot of conversations amongst themselves, even aside from the prompts, and we definitely encourage and permit that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think it's good to hear how that's happening online as well, right? So it's sort of being reinforced in a lot of different ways across these classrooms. Okay, our next question is, I'd love to just hear what strategies you have for thinking about fostering cognitive skills in your classroom. So for cognitive skills, thinking about research, experiential learning, and critical thinking, and what that means to you in your classroom and how you're helping students develop some of those skills in their first year. Laura, do you want to get us started?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
So if we want to talk about research, we do in Comp 1 and Comp 2, both courses, students have a research project. I think what's most important is choice, right? We have a lot of room, especially in first year writing, to give students choice. Choice and voice, I would say, are the two most important things. So giving them the choice to self-select what they want to research, what they're really interested in, and talking to them about how much their voice matters. In Comp 2, they still are getting choice, but their choice is something related to public art. And so they're connecting it to ideas that are important to them. And then one way to foster the critical thinking skills is with that research. So they're collecting sources, they're answering a research question, but they're on something they're already interested in. And then they're transforming that. And this is something kind of fun that we are able to do in both of our composition courses. They're transforming their research into some other mode, some other genre for an audience of their peers. So while maybe another 18-year-old or 19-year-old, 20-year-old doesn't want to read a research paper, how could you share those research results with them in a creative manner? And they do all kinds of fantastic things in Comp 1. So I had a student last semester who did a research on drag, the benefits of drag. And then the last day of class for their presentation to share their research results came dressed in drag and talked about, the mental health benefits of dressing in drag. Another student did it on baking. And if there were any, she works part-time as a baker, and she found it to be a stress reliever in her own life. And so she researched whether there were actual mental health or physical benefits to baking. And she found all kinds of research that said there was. So on the last day of class, she created a matching game. And so she made all of these little cards. They were very creative. And then she had students play like a concentration game with her. All of the cards had facts from her research on it. And she made little tiramisus and brought it into the class, right? So we're still fostering cognitive skills. We're doing the research, but we're also making it creative and interesting. In Comp 2, they research some kind of issue related to public art, like a mismatch between what's created and how the audience receives it. And then for their final project, they propose their own piece of public art based upon their research. So they're putting it into actuality, even though they're not creating the real thing, they're still using research to make a suggestion, a proposal for a piece of public art, and then drawing it up. So lots of cool things that help them with their critical thinking skills. And again, the conversation, right? Listening to what other people have to say, lots of discussion in class. Would this work? What do you think about this? And so they're constantly adjusting their thinking. And we're all learning from each other. I'm learning from them at the same time.
Great. It's great to hear about some of those projects and the different manifestations that they have. Annie, do you want to share a little bit in terms of maybe experiential learning with FYE and cognitive skill building?
Sure, absolutely. And just to piggyback on that notion of choice and voice, whenever I'm thinking about any of the things we're doing in the classroom that day, it's always how can we make this active, right? Because a lot of the things that we do in FYE can be sometimes very passive, right? Like learning about career exploration, but how can we make it active? Most of our learners are kinesthetic or would benefit from, using their bodies, moving around, being active. So one of the things that we do in terms of experiential learning or career or exploration is we host a CCS alumni panel, young alums, where we ask young alums who have graduated in the last 3 semesters to come back and talk to the students about what they've done. Now, that sounds like very passive, right? They're just sitting and listening. But one of the ways that we make it more active is to introduce this notion of the panel weeks ahead of time. And then students are asked to come up with questions that they would want to ask. So they don't have to think of them in the moment, right? Like they have a chance to think about what do I really want to learn about a student that's, only like 4 or 5 years ahead of me and what they're doing right now. And then I compiled all those questions and I gave them to our panel leader, who is Brandy, who is here today. She's an excellent leader of our Young Alum panel. And one of the awesome things that happened this year was Brandy actually pointed out a direct quote from one of the students so that they know that they're involved, right? Like these questions are really coming from them. And then we do a follow-up in the next class period where we have a discussion, like, what did you learn? What would you want to do if you wanted to follow up with one of these alums? Things like that. So thanks, Brandy. Shout out to Brandy.
Allie or Michelle, do you want to jump in?
Sure. The other thing about this, as you were saying that, like I totally agree with all of this, and choices, which I typed in the chat, is just the best way to get students engaged, more chance of them being involved in the class, that excitement. When you're excited, they're excited. When there's something that they want to learn, they're more likely to accomplish what the goal is. The other thing about cognitive, when we're thinking about cognitive abilities, we're really thinking about asking questions, communication, all of these things, learning new skills. I think it's important to give students some agency in how they're learning, because some students know, as Annie said, like they're kinesthetic learners. It's important to keep them engaged. There's some sort of activity, keeping it connected to those real world scenarios. How does it, going back to the basis, how does it affect me? Um, but also students know, and a lot of times, how they learn or like what is going to help them. So also like talking to them, of asking questions of, do you learn better this way? Do you like to read? Do you like to this? Like getting them involved in the learning process as well can also kind of help. Like, oh, should we do more presentations? Do you guys want to present with each other? Should we do more readings? If they're not reading, why? And let's find a solution together to fix that. So we're giving some students some choice, not only in the content, but also talking to them and giving them that sense of responsibility in learning and teaching them how to learn instead of just teaching the content. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll jump into that a little bit more in a second. Michelle, did you have anything you want to add to this area?
Well, I could say cognitive skill building in terms of digital literacy is probably mostly about learning how to find what you need on the internet when you're learning new software, and how to navigate and find credible sources for learning.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I think um, research happens in all sorts of ways, and so it's interesting to hear what that looks like across different classes and how that relates to developing critical thinking skills. So kind of building on what Allie started to touch on in terms of student agency, which I think is so important to help establish at early on, so that students really have that confidence, as you all were talking about, through their time at CCS. The next area is self-leadership. So to me, that relates really directly to having agency in your work, in yourself as a student at the school. And I'd love to hear from anyone who would like to share just like what that looks like in your classroom, how you're developing self-leadership skills. So some of the things that I'm thinking about are identity development, which I think is really happening across all of these classes in different ways, as well as building resiliency as a student. And I think we started to talk about that. I think that's a thread throughout, but if anyone wants to elaborate on that, yeah. Does someone want to get us started?
I will, since I opened the can of
Sure. Thank you.
um, so a couple of things I was thinking. This is something I very strong thoughts about because I think it's so important. And it's this idea that we're teaching students how to do things instead of, just giving them answers. So part of this is anything from showing when they have questions, showing them how to find the answers. So, and it can be anything from something about content to where do I find this person on campus, and giving them the information and showing them how to get to that answer. And that can also go with the idea of like, how do we learn? How do you learn the best? With the FYE leaders this year, in part of our training, I went over helping students identify when they work the best, stress management, how they handle those things. And, knowing that, if you need to eat something before you go to class, if you're a night person and you work at night versus, and helping them figure out what that schedule is and identifying it early can help with some of those things, as well as just checking in with students and, what can you do differently? What did they need? At the beginning of the semester with students, I like to do either something along the lines of like an empathy map or like a strengths and weaknesses test, where we either go over, like in an empathy map, we talk about like what you need, like SEL things that you need, social emotional learning, what academic needs, what are your strengths. And so like I can also see as a class where we're at, but they can identify and start to put into words strengths and weaknesses, or just doing like strengths and weaknesses. What is a strength? What is a weakness? And we talk about it and identifying when you share those things as a class, if your strength is public speaking and someone else's strength is writing, maybe you two work together on something. And just identifying how those work together really goes with also showing students how these skills can help after just classroom, outside of the classroom.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in there because I think it's really important that students are able to take agency for their learning process. And we're doing this transition from high school where there's a lot of hand holding, right? So it's interesting to me that a lot of us here had taught high school before too. And so we know there's not a huge difference between what happens in high school and what happens maybe that first year, except in terms of students themselves, there's not a lot of difference, but in terms of expectations, there's a huge difference. And so we're trying to get them used to the fact that they need to figure some of these things out for themselves. So in Comp 1, what we do is the very first day of class, we go over habits of mind, which are these research-based dispositions that are shown to be traits of people who are successful in lots of different ways, professionally, personally, in relationships. And students, we go through all of these different dispositions like persistence, resilience, creativity, metacognition, engagement, and students identify one that is a strength of theirs and they write about it and they explain why that's a strength of theirs and how it's going to help them in their first year of college. And then they also identify one that they think is a challenge for themselves and how they want to work on that and why it's a challenge and how they think they'll be more successful if they're able to establish this as one of their dispositions. And so we don't just do that the first day, we continue to go back to that, right? So I'm helping them develop a reflective practice and I'm modeling it too, saying, I'm having a problem with flexibility right now because of the snow days, and I'm trying to figure out what that means and how we can change. And you guys help me think of this, help me work through this. And then one of the very last things they do in the course, the last day of the semester, is they go back to their habits of mind and they reflect on them again. What has changed? Do I see this as a strength now, or is it something I want to continue to work with? So getting them thinking about, especially their metacognition, we talked about that a lot. What does it mean to understand your own processes, your own way of doing things? And do you understand your process, or do you not even have a process? Or could you improve it? So getting them to think about their own way of learning is really important.
Thank you.
If I could
Yeah,
respond
please.
to that. Brandy in the chat, Brandy mentioned resiliency, and resilience is a crucial part of effective leadership. In digital techniques, we've tried to talk about when you're learning something new is to keep the stakes low and leave room for failure and error. And I think it's important for a freshman to have that space where they're not expected to create a masterpiece for everything, especially if it's a new technique, new software, or whatever the course they're in. So with digital techniques, we have small bite-sized projects each week. So if one week didn't work out so well, they have opportunity. So it builds resilience in the way that uh, uh, they have an opportunity to try it again. And then they see that everyone's work is in work in progress.
Thank you. Annie? Oh, Annie, you're
Yep,
muted.
just real quick. Again, I love to see how we're all sort of tackling this from different angles. And one of the things that we do in FYE is again, looking at their strengths. The students are identifying their strengths and then giving them sort of real world examples that they might experience. And these sort of straddle the line between academic and personal, just because I think FYE is also kind of straddling that line between, student engagement outside the classroom and inside the classroom. But so, even if they haven't experienced it, they'll know that this might be coming and they can start planning ahead, right? So like, your computer crashes the night before an assignment is due. Think about your strengths and what do you do, right? So, or my best friend wants to meet me for a concert, but I have class at that time. What do you do, right? So again, giving them very real world examples so that they are, again, have that agency to know themselves and know what would be the best thing for them.
Great, thank you. Um, let's see. I'm just looking at the time. Um, Maybe if anyone wants to touch on before the final question, and we did, I think, talk about this in different ways, and maybe we can begin with Michelle, but thinking about fostering digital skills, because obviously that is where it's happening the most across these classes, but I think it's happening everywhere in different ways, and so thinking about, one area of this is how students are engaging with Canvas. I'd love to hear how that might happen in your classroom. I know, Michelle, you talked a little bit about that in terms of like collaboration and communication. But then also how are you building digital literacy skills? Because that sort of expands even beyond a student's time at CCS into career readiness.
Yeah, so we've been improving this course every semester, getting feedback from students and from faculty and from research connected with ed tech. And the course is less about learning Photoshop and Illustrator, which it might have been at some point, but I think always the purpose of it has been to first and foremost develop digital literacy. We start with everyone's using Canvas, but in this course we talk about what the modules are, how modules are different than um, assignment pages, and really showing them and requiring them to use Canvas for submissions. They're required to submit different formats. So part of digital literacy, regardless of what your area of study is, regardless of your artistic interest or your career goals, most people at some point in any way connected with the creative industries will benefit from understanding how to share files, how to format or size an image of their work, how to prepare work for press or for printing, and how to use digital tools to help um, make variations and iterations on artwork and show more ideas. So the tools are not necessarily just for creating artwork. The course is designed for all types of artists. And our goal is once they get through it, they understand that and recognize the benefit of having digital literacy to understand how to get answers to what you don't know how to do, understand how to format your work, to share, to collaborate, how to share files, how to use sharing links, um, how to organize your files. Week 2 is all about naming your files. So again, even if you're not in a field of art where you're using digital tools for the artwork itself, it's likely you have liberal arts courses or you're going to be interacting with other creatives that do that. So naming files, organizing your files so you don't lose them. Some students still don't know the difference between their desktop and a document folder.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that?
I'll add really quick the professionalism part of that, going along with naming or changing file names. A lot of students are coming from a time where they don't really know how to send a formal email. So giving them email templates, showing them and guiding them, like this is how you start an email using correct punctuation. If you ask for a file to be sent in a specific format and titled a certain way, like teach them like how to actually do it, and then don't accept it if it's not done the way you want it, and have them resubmit it, so that if that is something that's important to you, to really like keep that consistency. But going over that professionalism part of like emails, naming things, capitalization, some of the stuff that we don't think is important, a lot of them don't think about as much as we do.
Great,
um,
thank you.
One other thing about Canvas, really quick,
Sure.
just showing students weekly, especially at the beginning, where assignments are, where things are, how do you find things, if it's at the beginning or end of class, like having it up on the screen and saying, okay, here is where you find the assignment. This is what we did today. Here's the assignment for next week. So they get used to how you learn or like how your class runs on Canvas, because as we all know, we don't all run pages the same way. So keeping it consistent and showing them, at least for the first couple of weeks, where it is can really help with this confusion.
Thank
Can I
you.
just jump in real quick, and
Sure.
I wanted to tell you what we do with generative AI, because I think that's important that everybody knows what we're talking about in first year comp. So in comp one, we talk about the ethics of generative AI, and students come with lots of ideas about AI, but not really understanding all of the ethical implications behind it. So we introduce them to that, like what are all of the issues related to it? And we have a really great conversation. It's kind of funny because I've had students in the past say, "Oh, we hate AI. It's terrible. It can't make hands." And then I'll say, "Well, what about for writing?" And they're like, "Oh, it's fine. Yeah, you should definitely use it for writing." And so we have to talk about how those ethical implications still matter in writing too, right? And we talk about ideation and critical thinking and all of that. So we do that in Comp 1. And then in Comp 2, we take it one step further and we talk about benefits and limitations of actually using generative AI in your work, and how could it be a tool that you might eventually use, because they're going to have to use it probably out in the professional world, but also what are limitations that we have to be really aware of. So in terms of digital literacy, we're talking about that in the composition classes too.
Thank you for including that in the conversation. Annie, did you have anything you want to add?
I was just gonna hop in and say that we definitely do an intro to Canvas on day one, and one of the ways that um, is incorporated into every FYE section is there's a pre and post test that students take. It's kind of a way to help us assess the course, but also help them to see what they've learned over the course of their first semester. And so getting them comfortable with accessing Canvas on that first day through the pre-test is just a nice way to know that they're at least seeing it, right? And knowing that it's an important tool in their classes.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna end with Michelle's comment before we open it up for any questions from our audience.
Okay, I was going to say, Annie, that's great, and I love that, and I think the Canvas portion for the students is connected with the repeated exposure idea, a skill, anything new, they can learn it one time in one class in one semester, and they have difficulty translating it. And that applies to art and design concepts. They can learn them in foundations. Sometimes there's a gap and they're not translating it to the studio courses. So having it there, that's like the number one spot, the best spot for that. We reinforce it in Digitech, and then hopefully they're seeing the connection and understanding. And it works the same way with art and design principles.
Great, thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to just open it up in case anyone had any comments or questions. If you could either put it in the chat or raise your hand, and then I can call on you, that would be great. While we're waiting, I can ask.
I could ask a question, Becca, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Okay, so one of the things that is, always on my mind is that room for growth piece, right? Like how we can, and one of the things that I've noticed in thinking about first year curriculum, first year experience is that resiliency piece. And I'm so glad that you're here too, Brandy, to say that that's something that CCS Leads is focusing on. So one of the things that, again, is part of the pre and post test, the first question that the students are asked at the beginning and the end of the semester is, I am excited about my first year at CCS. And then they rate it on the scale of 1 to 5, right? 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. And the scores actually went down over the course of the semester, which I think we can understand that just in general, right? New student orientation, welcome week, right? Student engagement does such a great job, and so do all of their instructors and all of their departments to welcome students in, and they're just on a high when they come in. So we had a preponderance of fives, right, in that first week. And then, the scores went down 5.69% at the end of the semester. Some of that drop off is understandable, but I would like for that number to not be quite so high. So I just, resiliency is something that I'm thinking a lot about. And I'm just wondering for everybody in attendance today, like, what do you all use to build that resiliency inside and for those of you here that are working with students outside the classroom, how do you work to build that?
I think one of the things that I do with students about around midterms or earlier, if I feel that students are struggling, is doing like a midway anonymous check-in with students and having them, give feedback of like, what's working, what's not working, what questions do you have, like, what are you struggling with, and doing like an anonymous form where like I step out of the room, they fill it out, and then they don't have to put their name on it, or you can do it whatever digitally, however you want to do it. And that gives me an idea of kind of the temperature of the class, but also if there's like something consistently of if there's 20 students in a class and 10 of them are struggling with something, like, okay, I need to go back. Or if something's like, if a bunch of them are saying, you're talking too much, then which is a real thing, I mean, it's proven that lectures don't really work. You can't have that much information. You can only take in 5 pieces of information at a time. Like, so, if that's something then how am I going to change the format of my class? And that's something that also, again, students feel like they have a voice of, hey, my opinion matters. You're listening to me.
I think too, letting them know it's okay to ask for help, right? So particularly with these early students, they think that when things start falling apart, that's it and it's over. And then they tend to disappear or stop submitting assignments. And so I spend a lot of time reaching out to them, right? Like, hey, I haven't seen you in class. What's going on? And I try to stay on top of that, or catching them after class and saying, can we have a quick chat? I noticed you haven't turned anything in. And I think that they don't realize it's okay to say, I need some help, or can I have a little bit more time on this? And a lot of times students will actually say to me, oh, I just wasn't going to do it because I thought you wouldn't take it. No, I think that's part of teaching resiliency, is letting them know it is okay to get help and to reach out for help when you need it.
That's one of the first things I tell them.
I was
Oh,
gonna
sorry.
That's something that and I'm new, so I'm getting reacclimated to our student body, but at our winter orientation, we played a short game where we had students do this or that, like coffee or tea, this or that. And it was the last question for them was, if you're struggling, are you more likely to just bear down and do it yourself, or to ask for help? And everybody said bear down and do it themselves. And so I was like, that's a trick question. Actually, that's the opposite of what you're supposed to do in this environment. Like, your tuition is funding all the resources to make it so that you're successful. So the last thing you should do is try to figure it out on your own when there's so many, support services and resources here. But it was so interesting to see like everyone's hand go up for don't ask for help. That was very interesting.
Allie and then Annie, and then I think we'll have to unfortunately wrap up.
That's funny that you say that, Brandy, because that's the first, and Laura, that's the first thing I do with students is, set your expectations for their class, and saying the very first thing I say is like, we're all human, things happen, cars break down, family emergencies happen, whatever, you have mental health things, like, we're also human. And so like I will share with them like also if something is going on in my life too. So I'm being transparent of, hey, I haven't graded this stuff yet because I just, had to spend time with my grandma or whatever. So it also is giving them like, again, modeling, but showing them that you are people too, and letting them know that if you just talk to me, and I always make it very clear, if you talk to me ahead of time, like, hey, I'm not going to get this done, or hey, this is going on, I'm far more likely to be super generous and extending deadlines and, up to a certain extent than I would be if, weeks pass and then you're just talking to me. Not that that would ever, stop me from hearing anyone. And another point of that is, Brandon, you mentioned all the resources. Freshmen don't ask for help or know where to go. So you can tell them that we have resources, but also tell them where they are and how to find them, because that's the big gap.
Yeah, digital techniques is one thing we want to do more of is we have a visit to the AVC, pointing to the page where the tutoring center is, the explanation of what the 24-hour labs are. So all of the projects are connected with those resources. So again, they need to hear it again, even if they've been told during orientation or somewhere else.
Thanks, Michelle. Annie, do you want to finish us off with your final comments? Still muted.
So two things. One is knowing where to go to find them, right? We actually do like a walk and gawk tour during the course of their first year experience so that they're not just learning about, yes, there is a CTW, but they're walking in to the Center for Tutoring and Writing, kind of breaking that threshold, or the ABC, ABS, et cetera. And again, we have them take a poll so that they're be sure, whatever the top three choices are, they go to those three places based on a poll that they did in Canvas. And then the FYE leader leads the tour and also adds a few other places along the way that the leader knows that they need to go to, even if they didn't vote for that as their top three. So going into, again, that active piece, right? So, okay, so this is what the wellness center looks like. Great. Now I know it's here when I need it. And then, Laura, you were telling that, knowing it's okay to ask for help reminded me that sometimes I do tell students, again, a personal story, right? So I remember in college, I wrote an essay for an instructor who said, I stopped reading after the first paragraph. I'm not going to even read this until you go to the tutoring center. So again, that's an indictment of that instructor. And luckily, nobody at this school is like that, which is great. But it lets them know that, that was, we all need help, right? And clearly I needed a lot of help because my instructor wouldn't even read past the first paragraph. So again, letting them know that we're human and we all need help and we should ask for it even before we know we need it, right? And in cases when we can remember to.
Thanks, Annie. And I'm glad this kind of came out in our final moments of conversation with this question that you asked, because we didn't really get a chance to talk about the last skill area, which is acclimation, and it did come out through this discussion as well. I just want to thank all of our panelists and I'm for your participation and sharing all of these wonderful things you're doing. I'm going to turn it over to Amy to close us out.
Yeah, so also thank you to all of our participants, everyone who signed on. We will be sharing a recording of today's meeting, as Becca mentioned earlier, just for reference via email. So if you joined late or if you want to share out to folks who were not able to join us today, that will be available shortly. And then you can look out for information on our next FPD session, which will be held in the fall 2025 semester. Thank you, everyone, for joining today.
Thank you.